I want to tell you about the day I walked into my own funeral. It was a Tuesday. The flowers were white lilies. I have always hated white lilies, which my children would have known if they had ever paid attention. There was a framed photograph of me on a table near the entrance, one from 15 years ago that made me look considerably more serene than I have ever felt in my life. There were about 30 people in the room. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. All of them were sitting very quietly, waiting for something to begin. I was not, to be clear, dead. I was 71 years old, in reasonable health, wearing my good blue dress, and standing in the doorway of a funeral parlor that my 3 children had booked under my name without telling me. The first person to see me was my neighbor Janet. Her mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. My son Richard, sitting in the front row, turned around to see what Janet was staring at. The expression on his face was something I will take to my actual grave. My name is Gloria. And what I am about to tell you is the most extraordinary thing that has ever happened to me. Or to them. Before I tell you how I ended up standing in my own funeral parlor, I need to tell you who I am. I am Gloria Beatrice Hartwell. I was a secondary school English teacher for 34 years. I taught teenagers how to find meaning in stories, how a well-placed word could change everything, how the best narratives always had a twist you didn't see coming. I like to think my life has been consistent with what I taught. My husband Edward passed 8 years ago from a heart condition we had known about for a long time but had hoped would be kinder than it was. Edward was a funny man, genuinely, effortlessly funny in the way that very few people are, and his absence left a silence in my house that I have never fully stopped noticing. We had 3 children. Richard, the eldest, who had always been practical to the point of coldness. Donna, the middle child, who had married a man named Craig with very firm opinions about money. And Jamie, the youngest, who had his father's laugh and unfortunately not much else of his father's character, easily led, easily convinced, too eager to be liked by whoever was in the room. After Edward died, I managed well. I kept the house. I kept my garden. I took a watercolor class on Thursday mornings and discovered, at 63, that I had a genuine talent for painting clouds. I was not a woman in decline. I was a woman who had lost her husband and was rebuilding, quietly and with considerable stubbornness, a life that was worth living. But Richard had different ideas about what my life should look like. Richard had, over the preceding 2 years, become increasingly focused on what he called planning ahead. He wanted me to see a financial advisor. He wanted me to update my will. He wanted me to think seriously about the house, whether it was too big, too much upkeep, whether the equity might be better managed while I was still in a position to make clear decisions. I told Richard the first was 71, not 171, and that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Richard did not take this well. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was that Richard had been having conversations with Donna and Jamie that I was not part of. And those conversations had taken a turn that I could not have imagined even in my darkest moments. It started with a phone call I was not supposed to receive. I had given my neighbor Janet my spare phone, an old one I never used, so she could call me if she locked herself out. Janet is 83 and locks herself out with remarkable frequency. That phone sat in my kitchen drawer for months, forgotten. One morning, while looking for a pen, I found it. The battery had enough charge to show me one notification, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, left 3 days earlier, addressed to the Hartwell family. It was from Pemberton's funeral services. The message was brief and professional. It confirmed the booking for a memorial service, a celebration of life, for one Gloria Beatrice Hartwell. It gave a date. It gave a time. It asked the family to confirm whether they wanted the lily arrangement or the rose arrangement. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. Then I played the message again. Slowly. to make absolutely certain I had heard it correctly. I had. My children had booked a funeral service for me. I was alive. I was sitting in my kitchen. I was, if anything, slightly annoyed about an aphid problem on my roses. And my children had booked a funeral. I did not call Richard. I did not call Donna. I did not call Jamie. I called my solicitor, a woman named Margaret who had handled my affairs for 20 years and who, when I explained the situation, was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Gloria," she said finally. "Are you telling me your children have arranged a funeral for you without your knowledge or consent?" "That appears to be the case," I said. Another long silence. "What would you like to do?" she asked. I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "I would like to attend," I said. Before I did anything else, I needed to understand what was actually happening. Margaret helped me. Over the following week, very quietly and very carefully, she made inquiries. What she found made my blood run cold and then, after a moment, made it run absolutely still with a particular kind of fury I have only felt twice in my life, once when a colleague was unfairly dismissed, and once now. Richard had consulted a different solicitor, not Margaret, someone he thought I didn't know, about the process of having a person declared mentally incapacitated. He had gathered statements. From Donna. From Jamie. From Craig, Donna's husband, who had always looked at my house the way a man looks at something he intends to own. The statements described a woman who forgot things. Who repeated herself. Who had become a danger to herself and others. Who had left the gas on twice and fallen in the garden. I had never left the gas on in my life. I had tripped on a garden hose once, 18 months ago, in front of Richard, and had laughed about it at the time. The funeral, Margaret explained, was almost certainly designed as a dry run, a gathering of family and friends to plant the narrative. To establish publicly, before any legal proceedings, that Gloria Hartwell was gone. Not dead, perhaps, but gone. Diminished. Someone whose affairs needed managing by others. The house was worth £640,000. I sat with that information for a full evening. I looked at Edward's photograph on the mantelpiece, still smiling, still funny, completely unaware of what his children had become. Then I called Margaret back and told her exactly what I wanted to do. She laughed for a long time. Then she said, "Gloria, I have been a solicitor for 31 years. I have never done anything like this before." "Neither have I," I said. "But there's a first time for everything." I arrived at Pemberton's funeral services at 2:45 on a Tuesday afternoon, 15 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. I had dressed carefully. My good blue dress, the one Edward always said brought out my eyes. My pearl earrings. My best coat. I had done my hair properly and worn proper shoes, not the comfortable ones I usually favored. If I was going to attend my own funeral, I was going to look presentable. Margaret was with me. She had insisted. She was also carrying a briefcase, which I thought was a nice touch. We stood in the car park for a moment. Through the glass front of the funeral parlor I could see people filing in. Neighbors. Old friends. My sister Patricia, who lived in Edinburgh and who had apparently been called by Richard and told I had passed peacefully. Patricia had flown down that morning. She was 78 years old and had made that journey believing her sister was dead. I felt the fury again, very cold and very clear. I walked in. The first person to see me was Janet. Janet's reaction was, and I say this with great affection, magnificent. She stood up so fast she knocked her order of service onto the floor. She said, at full volume, in the absolute silence of a funeral parlor, "Gloria. You're alive." 30 heads turned. I walked down the center of that room to the front row where my 3 children sat. Richard had gone the color of old chalk. Donna had her hand pressed to her mouth. Jamie, my youngest, Edward's boy, the one with his father's laugh, had tears running down his face before I even reached him, and I could not tell if they were guilt or relief or both. I stopped in front of him. The room was so quiet I could hear the flower arrangements. I said, at a perfectly normal volume, "Hello, Richard. You seem surprised to see me." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I turned to the room. 30 faces. Neighbors, friends, my sister Patricia, who was gripping the arm of her chair with both hands and staring at me like I was a miracle. I said, "I apologize for the confusion. I am not dead. I am, in fact, perfectly well. I discovered this gathering 3 days ago and decided, after some thought, that I ought to attend. I hope the flowers weren't too expensive. I would have chosen roses." Someone at the back, I found out later it was my old colleague Barbara from the school, started to laugh. Then someone else. Then the whole room, in that slightly hysterical way that people laugh when relief is too big for any other expression. Margaret stepped forward with her briefcase. Richard found his voice. "Mum, this isn't what it..." "Richard," I said. "My solicitor is here. I suggest you listen carefully to what she has to say." Margaret was, as always, precise and thorough. She had prepared documents. A full cognitive assessment I had undergone the previous week, the results of which showed a woman in complete possession of her mental faculties, with memory and reasoning scores in the top 15% for her age group. A statement from my GP confirming I was in good health. A letter from my actual financial advisor confirming my accounts were in excellent order and had been managed with consistent competence. She had also prepared a revised will, which I had signed 2 days earlier, leaving the house to a housing charity for elderly women, with personal items and a modest sum to be divided among my children, and a larger sum held in trust for my grandchildren with the condition that it be released when they turn 25, administered by Margaret and not by their parents. She placed copies in front of Richard, Donna, and Craig. She placed a further document in front of Richard, a formal notice that any application to have me declared incapacitated would be contested, and that the false statements provided to his solicitor would be the subject of a formal complaint. Richard read it. His jaw tightened. He looked up at me. I looked back at him steadily. Donna was crying. Craig had gone very still. Jamie had his face in his hands. I turned to the room of neighbors and friends who had come to mourn me and I said, "I am so sorry you were misled. I am deeply sorry that my sister Patricia was told something untrue and traveled all this way. The tea and sandwiches have apparently been paid for. I suggest we have them anyway. It seems a shame to waste good sandwiches." Barbara started laughing again. Patricia crossed the room and held me for a long time without saying anything at all. Richard did not contest the will. I believe Margaret's documents made the cost-benefit analysis very clear. Donna and Craig moved to a different city 6 months later. We exchanged Christmas cards. It is, I think, the honest version of our relationship, cordial, distant, uncomplicated by pretense. Jamie came to see me 2 weeks after the funeral. He sat in my kitchen and cried properly, ugly, genuine, ashamed crying, for about 20 minutes. He told me Richard had convinced him it was for my own good. That I was struggling more than I let on. That it would be kindest to get everything sorted before things deteriorated. I told Jamie that the road to very bad places is frequently paved with "for your own good." He nodded. He has called me every Sunday since. Last month he brought my grandchildren for the weekend and I taught them to paint clouds. They were terrible at it. It was one of the best weekends I have had in years. Patricia stayed for 2 weeks after the funeral. We talked more honestly than we had in 30 years. She told me things about our childhood I had half forgotten. I told her things about Edward the First had never told anyone. She goes home on a Sunday and calls me on a Monday. It is a new rhythm and I love it. The house is still mine. The roses are recovering from the aphids. My Thursday watercolor class has resumed and last week I painted a cloud that my teacher said was genuinely accomplished. I am 71 years old. I am not done. I am, in fact, just getting started. I taught English for 34 years. I taught my students that the best stories always have a moment where everything shifts, where the character who has been underestimated steps forward and changes the entire direction of the narrative. I did not plan to live that lesson quite so literally. But here we are. What happened to me was not, I want to be clear, something that only happens in stories. There are older people right now whose children are making decisions about their lives, their homes, their futures, not out of malice always, but out of impatience, or greed, or simply the very human tendency to treat the people we love as problems to be solved rather than people to be respected. If you are older and you feel this happening, the quiet managing, the gentle suggestions, the meetings you are not invited to, I want you to hear this. You are not finished. Your story is not over. And you are allowed to walk into whatever room they have prepared for you and remind them, clearly and without apology, that you are still very much alive. Wear your good dress. Bring your solicitor. And choose the roses. If Gloria's story left you speechless, please give this video a like and subscribe. We share powerful mother stories every single week. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Gloria's position? Would you have walked in? I want every opinion.